In Jericho, New York, a man finally found out what was inside the heavy barrel in his crawl space. In 1999, a new homeowner demanded that the old barrel that was in the crawl space be removed before he closed on the house. However, the previous owner said that it was there when he moved in. In fact, his kids used to play hide and seek behind it. So they pull it out to the curb and open it. A horrific smell wafts out of this barrel, and they realize that the body of a woman had been shoved inside. She was a pregnant Hispanic female in her 20s, and it was determined that she had been beaten severely. The drum also contained plastic pellets, artificial green dye, a fake plant stem, and a purse and a notebook. Using a special light, investigators were able to read the notebook, and one page said, "Don't be mad, I told the truth." Inside her purse, they also found a residency card, and they were able to look up the immigration number. They found that the body belonged to a woman named Reyna Marroquin, and she worked at a synthetic flower factory in the 60s. One of the phone numbers in the address book belonged to a woman named Kathy Andrade, and investigators called her, and this woman immediately broke down in tears after hearing Reyna's name. She told them that her friend had been sleeping with a married man. She got pregnant, and he'd been giving her money and telling her that he'd leave his wife and kids for her. As she entered into the 9th month of pregnancy, she found out that this was all a lie, and she freaked out and decided to call the wife and tell her everything. She then called Kathy and told her that the man had threatened to kill her. The last time she'd ever heard from Reyna was January in 1969, but Kathy never knew the father of Reyna's unborn child, so she didn't know who to refer the police to. After the discovery of the remains was made public, a man also left an anonymous tip with the police. He said that Reyna had been sleeping with her boss at the synthetic flower factory. And who was this boss but none other than a man named Howard Elkins, one of the previous owners of the home. He sold the house in 1972, and when police located him at his new residence in Florida, he was extremely combative. The now old man denied everything and refused to give a DNA sample. He was found the next day in his neighbor's car with a shotgun wound to his head. He'd bought a shotgun from Walmart shortly after his police interrogation and taken the easy way out. DNA taken from Howard's body was a match to the fetus found in Reyna's stomach. While justice wasn't necessarily served, this story does have a bittersweet ending. They contacted Reyna's mother back in El Salvador and found that she had been wondering what happened to her daughter for 30 years after she moved to New York to work in fashion. And how creepy is this? Her mom had had recurring nightmares of her daughter being trapped in a small space screaming for help. Reyna's body was transported back to El Salvador, and her mother passed away just a month later, and they were buried side by side.
Reyna Angelica Marroquin was a 27-year-old Salvadorian immigrant living in the United States. She had arrived in Miami in 1966 and immediately moved to New York. In 1969, Reyna inexplicably vanished, and it would take 3 decades before what happened to her finally came to the surface. On September 2, 1999, a 55-gallon barrel was discovered in the crawl space of a home located in Jericho, Nassau County, New York. Inside the barrel was the skeletal remains of a pregnant woman. She was fully dressed, wearing a cardigan and a waist-length imitation leopard skin coat. She was folded into a fetal position inside the barrel, and her body had shriveled to just 57 pounds. Inside the barrel, a 3-inch book was also discovered, soaked through by body fluids. They were able to decipher one name, Howard Elkins. It would be discovered that Howard had once owned the home where the barrel was found. Howard was also Reyna's former employer. Howard and his wife had moved from New York to Florida in 1972, and it was the new owners of the home who made the grisly discovery. Howard was tracked down in Florida and was brought in for questioning. He claimed he had no knowledge of the barrel found in the crawl space of his home. However, it was evident that this was false, considering his name and phone number were written inside the book. When Howard went home following the interview, he shot himself in the head, ending his life. His body would be found inside a car parked inside his friend's garage. Towards the end of the month, the woman in the barrel would be identified as Reyna when her social security number was deciphered in the book. A medical examination determined that she had been killed by blows to the head. The reason it took so long for Reyna to be identified was because no missing persons report had ever been filed. Reyna had an affair with Howard and ended up pregnant. Howard murdered Reyna so their affair wouldn't be revealed. However, Reyna had already informed Howard's wife that she was pregnant with his child.
In 1969, a terrified woman made a desperate phone call. She feared for her life. Then, she vanished. Her body wouldn't be found for 30 years. This is the chilling case of Reyna Marroquin. Reyna Marroquin was a 27-year-old immigrant from El Salvador chasing the American dream. She worked as a maid for a wealthy businessman, but that job would soon become a nightmare. One night, Reyna made a frantic phone call to her best friend. She was crying, saying she had discovered a terrible secret, one that could get her killed. Before she could explain, she abruptly hung up, and that was the last time anyone heard from her. Days later, Reyna's friend went to her apartment, but she was gone. Her belongings were still there, but Reyna had vanished without a trace. For decades, her case went cold. Fast forward to 1999, a new homeowner was inspecting his property when he found a 55-gallon drum hidden in his basement. Inside, a perfectly preserved body. Investigators identified it as Reyna Marroquin. She had been murdered, her body sealed in the barrel for 3 decades.
The body is mummified. The skin is like rubber. The body was bent in half. Hands to feet. Head to knee. The cause of death is readily apparent. A skull is crushed by blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined it was 7 to 10 blows with a hammer. Even worse, the deceased is pregnant.
Detectives traced the drum back to Howard Elkins, a businessman who once owned the house. Elkins was a successful manufacturer of plastic containers, including industrial barrels, the same kind Reyna was found in. He had been having an affair with Reyna, who was believed to be pregnant with his child at the time of her disappearance. When police confronted Elkins, now in his 70s and living in Florida, he refused to answer questions. Detectives told him they planned to conduct a DNA test to confirm paternity. The very next day, before police could return, Elkins was found dead in his garage. He had taken his own life with a shotgun. Elkins' death was seen as an admission of guilt, but it left many unanswered questions. Why did he keep Reyna's body hidden for so long?
Kept his promise, so I called his house. His wife answered. I told her everything, the pregnancy and how he promised to leave her. She called him and there was a huge fight. He called me afterward and threatened to kill me. I was scared and called Kathy, crying, saying I had done something stupid. But I didn't explain much. I was just really worried about what might happen. Kathy rushed to my apartment, but when she arrived, I wasn't there. That was the last time Kathy heard from me. Since January 1969, I disappeared, and Kathy had no idea where I went. She didn't know my boyfriend's name, so she couldn't track him down. She went to the police, but they didn't pay much attention to the case. I was an immigrant, and they didn't take my disappearance seriously. They assumed I had gone back to El Salvador, but my mom stopped receiving my letters and she became worried. But she was too far away and didn't know what to do. Years passed, and the mystery grew. Then, in September 1999, the police got a call from a man, Ronald Cohen, who said he had found a body in a barrel. He was selling the house to another man, and the buyer asked him to remove the barrel, which had been in the basement for years. Ronald hadn't touched it since he bought the house, so he got help from 2 others to move it. The police came, opened the barrel, and found my mummified body inside. At first, they couldn't identify me. There were some personal belongings inside. My purse, a bunch of plastic flowers, and a notebook with some contacts and phone numbers. But because I'd been inside the barrel for so long, they needed to send everything for further analysis. The forensic team found out that I had been pregnant when I died. I had been in that barrel for over 20 years. The barrel was airtight, which preserved my body well. One of the first things the police did was track the barrel's identification numbers. They also started looking into the former owners of the house. That's when they found a name that stood out: Howard Elkins. He had owned the house and had sold it in 1972. He was also one of the owners of the plastic flower factory where I worked. He was my boss. But at this barrel held the secret of my disappearance. And only 30 years later was that secret finally uncovered. My name is Reyna Marroquin, and this is my sad and true story. In the 1960s, when I arrived in America from El Salvador, I settled in New York and began my new life there. I first found work as a nanny for a family, but later, friends invited me to work at Melrose Plastics. The job was physically demanding, but the salary was higher. There, I met a man who, in my eyes, was charming and confident, with an undeniable charisma. He turned out to be none other than the owner of the company, Howard Elkins. We began an affair, and only later did I find out that he was married. By then, I was already pregnant. I decided to tell his wife about my pregnancy. I did it without thinking of the terrible consequences. Tragically, in 1969, I vanished and never made it home. People searched for me, but it was all in vain. 30 years later, in 1999, a barrel was found in what had once been Elkins' home. When they opened it, they were horrified by what they saw inside. My mummified body lay among plastic pellets, along with several of my personal belongings. Those items helped the police follow the right trail, which led directly to Elkins. My cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. After that, he decided to dispose of my body, but came up with nothing better than sealing me inside that barrel. The police confronted him with the evidence, and the very same day, he took his own life. Do you think I was to blame for my own death?
Reyna Marroquin, December 2nd, 1941. She was born in El Salvador. And then around 1969, in January, this is where they thinking she died. She was an El Salvadorian woman who was murdered in the United States in 1969. Murder, I'm going to say mother again. Murder was not discovered until 1999, 30 years later, when her body was found in the former home of Howard B. Elkins, a prominent businessman who was identified as the prime suspect. Elkins committed suicide by gunshot in the back seat of a Ford Explorer at a friend's home in Boca Raton, Florida, after an interview with the police. Yo, wasn't he rich? Why is he in the back of a Ford Explorer? Damn. Tells you a lot. Okay, so on September 1999, a 55-gallon drum in a crawl space in a home in Jericho, New York, a Long Island suburb of the New York City, was found to contain a mummified remains of a pregnant Hispanic female in her late 20s, between 145 and 152 centimeters. Damn. In layman's terms, she was about 5 feet tall, with unusual dental work. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. The drum also contained polystyrene pellets, 2 rings, one inscribed MHR, and locket inscribed to Patricia, love Uncle Phil. Aww, that's just so sweet. Green dye, a plastic artificial plant stem, and an address book. The drum had been made in 1965 for transporting dye markings, showing it had been shipped to Melrose Plastics, a Manhattan-based artificial flower company partially owned by Howard B. Elkins, CEO, who was the former homeowner of the Jericho house. Elkins sold Melrose Plastics in 1972 and moved to Boca Raton, Florida, with his wife. Isn't it Boca Raton? I don't know. Yo. So he left. Okay. Under in frigid light, some of the deteriorated address book was legible. A social security number written on the first page belonged to Reyna Angelica Marroquin, a 27-year-old immigrant from El Salvador who had worked as a nanny and who was employed at the Melrose Plastic Factory on East 34th Street. They found out who she was through a social security number written in another uh, country. Wow, that's something else. Yo, at least, uh, dang, that was a miracle for that to be untouched by the liquid. A phone number in the book belonged to Kathy Andrada, who had been a friend of Marquin. When contacted, Andrada told police that Marquin had been having an extramarital affair with Elkins, but divulged that she had become afraid of him after telling his wife Ruth about the affair. Andrada went to Marquin's apartment in New Jersey but found it empty, and Marquin's hadn't been heard from since. Ooh. A woman fitting Marquin's description reportedly appeared with a toddler at Merrill's Plastics, and employees joked that the child's father was in fact Elkins. That's that's not funny. Investigation. Detectives who interviewed Elkins found him uncooperative. They informed him that they intend to obtain his DNA for comparison with that of the fetus found inside Marroquin. Ooh, is that why he shot himself? Because, baby, everything coming to light once they touch that fetus. The following day, on September 10th, 1999, Elkins was found dead in the back seat of a neighbor's car from a self inflicted gunshot wound from a 12 gauge Mossberg 500 pump action shotgun. Damn, he really wanted to blast himself. He had purchased at Walmart earlier. Walmart used to sell guns? Did Walmart still sell guns? I had never seen a real gun in Walmart. I just seen the little baby toys. DNA testing found that Elkins was the father of the fetus. Mm. Investigators believe Elkins either went to Marquin's apartment or lured her to the factory, ultimately killing her. He then took her body to the house in Jericho. You took her body to your house? Yo. Possibly with the intention of dumping her in the ocean from his boat. But after filling the barrel with plastic pellets to ensure it would sink, he found it too heavy to move and left it in the crawl space. Writer Oscar Quarrel went to San Martin, San Salvador, where Marquin's 95-year-old mother told him she had dreamt about Marquin trapped inside a barrel. Wow, your own mother? Wow, that is so sad. Yo, that's so heartbreaking. To know that your dream came true and that your daughter was really in a barrel is so sad. So sad.